apparent and recognized, yet people were too indolent, and too indifferent to suffering not their own, to bestir themselves about putting an end to them, until at last a benevolent reformer devoted his whole life to effecting the necessary changes. He divided all illnesses into 3 classes, those affecting the head, the trunk, and the lower limbs, and obtained an enactment that all diseases of the head, whether internal or external, should be treated with laudanum, those of the body with castor oil, and those of the lower limbs with an embrocation of strong sulphuric acid and water. It may be said that the classification was not sufficiently careful, and that the remedies were ill chosen, but it is a hard thing to initiate any reform, and it was necessary to familiarize the public mind with the principle, by inserting the thin end of the wedge first. It is not, therefore, to be wondered at that among so practical a people there should still be some room for improvement. The mass of the nation are well pleased with existing arrangements, and believe that their treatment of criminals leaves little or nothing to be desired, but there is an energetic minority who hold what are considered to be extreme opinions, and who are not at all disposed to rest contented until the principle lately admitted has been carried further. I was at some pains to discover the opinions of these men, and their reasons for entertaining them. They are held in great odium by the generality of the public, and are considered as subverters of all morality whatever. The Malcontents, on the other hand, assert that illness is the inevitable result of certain antecedent causes, which, in the great majority of cases, were beyond the control of the individual, and that therefore a man is only guilty for being in a consumption in the same way as rotten fruit is guilty for having gone rotten. True, the fruit must be thrown on one side as unfit for man's use, and the man in a consumption must be put in prison for the protection of his fellow citizens, but these radicals would not punish them further than by loss of liberty and a strict surveillance. So long as he was prevented from injuring society, they would allow him to make himself useful by supplying whatever of society's wants he could supply. If he succeeded in thus earning money, they would have him made as comfortable in prison as possible, and would in no way interfere with his liberty more than was necessary to prevent him from escaping, or from becoming more severely indisposed within the prison walls. But they would deduct from his earnings the expenses of his board, lodging, surveillance, and half those of his conviction. If he was too ill to do anything for his support in prison, they would allow him nothing but bread and water, and very little of that. They say that society is foolish in refusing to allow itself to be benefited by a man merely because he has done it harm hitherto, and that objection to the labor of the diseased classes is only protection in another form. It is an attempt to raise the natural price of a commodity by saying that such and such persons, who are able and willing to produce it, shall not do so, whereby everyone has to pay more for it. Besides, so long as a man has not been actually killed, he is our fellow creature, though perhaps a very unpleasant one. It is in a great degree the doing of others that he is what he is, or, in other words, the society which now condemns him is partly answerable concerning him. They say that there is no fear of any increase of disease under these circumstances, for the loss of liberty, the surveillance, the considerable and compulsory deduction from the prisoner's earnings, the very sparing use of stimulants, of which they would allow but little to any, and none to those who did not earn them, the enforced celibacy, and above all the loss of reputation among friends, are in their opinion as ample safeguards to society against a general neglect of health as those now resorted to. A man, therefore, so they say, should carry his profession or trade into prison with him if possible. If not, he must earn his living by the nearest thing to it that he can. But if he be a gentleman born and bred to no profession, he must pick oakum or write art criticisms for a newspaper. These people say further that the greater part of the illness which exists in their country is brought about by the insane manner in which it is treated. They believe that illness is in many cases just as curable as the moral diseases which they see daily cured around them, but that a great reform is impossible till men learn to take a juster view of what physical obliquity proceeds from. Men will hide their illnesses as long as they are scouted on its becoming known that they are ill. It is the scouting, not the physic, which produces the concealment. And if a man felt that the news of his being in ill health would be received by his neighbors as a deplorable fact, but one as much the result of necessary antecedent causes, as though he had broken into a jeweler's shop and stolen a valuable diamond necklace, as a fact which might just as easily have happened to themselves, only that they had the luck to be better born or reared. And if they also felt that they would not be made more uncomfortable in the prison than the protection of society against infection and the proper treatment of their own disease actually demanded, men would give themselves up to the police as readily on perceiving that they had taken smallpox as they go now to the straightener when they feel that they are on the point of forging a will, or running away with somebody else's wife. But the main argument on which they rely is that of economy, for they know that they will sooner gain their end by appealing to men's pockets, in which they have generally something of their own, than to their heads, which contain for the most part little but borrowed or stolen property. And also they believe it to be the readiest test, and the one which has most to show for itself. If a course of conduct can be shown to cost a country less, and this by no dishonorable saving, and with no indirectly increased expenditure in other ways, they hold that it requires a good deal to upset the arguments in favor of its being adopted, and whether rightly or wrongly I cannot pretend to say, they think that the more medicinal and humane treatment of the diseased of which they are the advocates would in the long run be much cheaper to the country. But I did not gather that these reformers were opposed to meeting some of the more violent forms of illness with the cat-o'-nine-tails, or with death, for they saw no so effectual way of checking them. They would therefore both flog and hang, but they would do so pitifully. I have perhaps dwelt too long upon opinions which can have no possible bearing upon our own, but I have not said the 10th part of what these would-be reformers urged upon me. I feel, however, that I have sufficiently trespassed upon the attention of the reader. End of chapter 12. Recording by Roger Moline.